Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's International Church Podcast. I have two very special guests with me today, and some of you from my church are going to recognize these faces immediately because we have two former pastors here with us. We have Norman Ellis and Brian Kirby, who have joined us, and that's one of the great things about this virus crisis is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can still bless each other via Zoom, via other means. So guys, so good to see you. Why don't you take a minute? Everybody may not know you. Introduce yourselves.
So I'm Brian Kirby, and I was the youth pastor at EIC from 1993 to 96. And then my wife and I and my daughter moved back to Paris in 2002, and I became the senior pastor from 2003 to 2010. And now we're living in McLean, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Great. Welcome, Brian. So good to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Brian Parker. I'm Norman Ellis. I preached my first sermon 9 years ago this month at EIC and was called to pastor in August of that year. That was 2001, and was there for 4 years, leaving in July of 2000. Did I say 2001? I misspoke. 2011, and left in July of 2015. Was there for 4 years. We moved back so that we could be closer to Molly's family and my family. And we've been living down here in Lake Charles now for about the last 5 years. Lake Charles, Louisiana. We're about 3 hours from Houston. It's the nearest big city from us.
Right. Well, and I'm thrilled to have both of you guys. Just you former pastors here, also friends of mine. Both of you have just been so kind to me as I've stepped into this role. Norman's the one who actually brought me to the church and the search team when I came as a youth pastor, and of course Brian, as always, is a little bit of a legend around these parts some ways, and so he's always been very kind as well. And so I'm so thankful that you're both willing to bless us. So just thinking through, both of you have quite a history at this church, and one of the things I understood from the beginning is the legacy that I was stepping into that you guys have left. So what, just in terms of your time here, what are some of your favorite memories that you look back on and think of?
I think about when I first arrived there in 1993, I had spent 2 summers in France in college, and then this was my first job right out of college. I got to move to Paris. And there, how about that for a first job? Coming from North Carolina. And when I arrived at Charles de Gaulle, there was the French family that I had lived with in the center of France, along with Bill Clark and Ruth Thomas, who were there, the pastor and wife then, who greeted me. And I just thought, wow, this is such an incredible opportunity. And then getting to serve as a youth minister. And in those years in 94, 3, 4, 5, we would do a church-wide ski retreat. It'd be more than 100 people, busloads of us going up to Val Thorens in the Three Valleys, and just worshiping there and being there together. I remember one year that Glenn Keane, the famous animator for Disney, was there with his family, and he created a story and sketched it, and he was our speaker for the evening. And I just thought, what an incredible opportunity to be with these interesting people from around the world. I just remember that it felt like this must be what heaven will be like, looking out over a congregation of people from Africa and Asia and all over Europe and the world, and just thinking this is the most diverse church I had ever been a part of. And was really seeing that just diversity and just feeling so blessed. And God allowed me to preach my very first sermon ever at Emmanuel. And God really used that process of me being there as a youth minister to be called into ministry. I kind of thought I was doing a stint for a few years in Paris as a Baptist missionary, but God used it to say, no, I have this call on your life. Mm-hmm. And then we were able to come back in 2002, and God gave me the chance to step back in to this church that I love so much, and first directing the gospel choir, and then being asked to be the senior pastor. And I just felt like that that I was brought there for such a time as this. It was
Right.
such a culmination of my background and my degrees and my connection and love for France. And I just feel like all those great memories of the gospel choir and the diversity and are just great memories that I think I'll cherish and are a part of me forever. That EIC's really shaped me.
There's so much relatable stuff there. I mean, every preacher remembers the first place where they preach, those first sermons, and how special that is. But also, what you said really resonates about what heaven will be like. I know I had a similar feeling when I first arrived, seeing the nations around me. And honestly, that's what I hear most visitors that we have. If people bring a mission trip or pass through, that's something you always hear. This is what heaven will be like. And so that's, thanks for sharing that. Norman, do you have some memories?
Yeah, mine's, my trek is a little bit different. Of course, I was a military chaplain for 27 years before retiring and then coming to IBC. But I was introduced to the IBC at Aviano.
Right.
And I was a chaplain. I was deployed in Italy, and I visited the church there. I can't remember who was pastor of the church at the time, but Sam Owens was sort of freelancing down in Brindisi in the south of Italy. And Sam Owens became pastor at Aviano for quite a few years. And I got in touch with IBC and stayed connected with them for about 10 years and really felt like that's where God was calling me upon my retirement from the military. So I saw what churches were available, and Brian, when you got ready to leave, you went out on the board too, and you were one of several I applied to, and it took about a year to sort through everything after you left. So there was a nice buffer zone. Either that, if it hadn't been for that, I'd have fallen right into your footprints, and that
hard act to follow.
that would have been.
I don't know whether it was famous or infamous, but maybe.
But I also there was I came at an incredibly transitional time in the church as it really seemed to be transitioning from an American church with an international flavor to a truly international church with some American flavor to it.
Right.
And that was fun. I had, because of the military, traveled all over the world, but I never got to see the whole world in one place. And so being pastor of an international church was like that. And that this is what heaven must be like was the repeated theme there. I think the high point, of course, for me was twofold. One was just being able to physically build on the legacy, because the church over the years had just done what all buildings do and needed some repair. And we did what we came to call the facelift of the church, was to paint and clean up and do some things around the outside cosmetically. And it was quite a lengthy project. It took some time. And that's what brings in the alumni issue we're going to talk about later. But in large part because of the support of the people who had left years before but still called that church home, we were able to raise the tremendous funds that were necessary to bring about the beautification of the church. That came along at the same time as we had what we came to call the gold and silver celebration. It just happened that we had our 50th anniversary at EIC the same time that the EBE had their 25th anniversary. And of course, we got to celebrate that together. And I think it was Newton. Brian, you probably know this. That said we either sit or we stand on the shoulders of giants. And that's what it felt like to be there and see all of these people in the living history of the church. Brian, of course, was there, and Scott and several others. Brian, I'm at a loss for the first pastor's name.
Jack Hancock's. Jack, who was able to fly over with me, which was such a blessing. And I think you honored him in such a beautiful way by talking about us standing on the shoulders of giants and recognizing him. I just remember being so touched being there and for him and thinking, wow, to come to the end of kind of his career and see the legacy of what he created. And I thought you just did a beautiful job of really honoring that.
Well, and I had just arrived that year as a youth pastor. And so I was privileged to be a part of that event. And like you said, that standing on the shoulders of giants, that really impacted me that week as well, because I had never, and that kind of brings us to one of the big things that I want to explore in this episode. I had never been a part of a church that had such a global family. A lot of times the churches you're a part of, if someone leaves the church, maybe they moved away or something. Sometimes it's for a bad reason that, they're mad at the church. But I had never been part of a church where so many people had left it, but it was all for good reasons. You see, and so there's these pastors who had come and gone and laid this foundation. And there's a group of people that had been part of the church and had left, large numbers of people all over the world. Maybe people listening to this right now are people who can relate to that. And that was a totally new factor to me, in something that I was so proud to be part of. That God has through generations brought people like you guys through to serve, brought them out, and new people come in, and yet that family remains. That remains.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because oftentimes we talk about the distinctives of an international church. What makes it different than being part of maybe a monocultural church and kind of wherever you're from. Some of this is cultural. You mentioned all the different cultures that come together. Some of it is this transient side. And so often we talk about the negatives that come with that. But man, there are so many positives. What for you guys, your experience pastoring an international church, what was that experience like for you? Are any of these distinctives really stand out for you guys?
I'd like to address that from just this perspective of being sort of the only show in town. I know we weren't, but in many ways we were. If you spoke English and you wanted to worship, you had few opportunities in Paris.
Yes.
And EIC was one of them. And I think immediately I was struck by, these people are not here to do church. And I don't mean that as a disparaging thing against these well-established and long-living life cycle churches that we have. But I do mean that these were people who, they were desperate to worship. Mm-hmm. So they looked for a place to do that, and came to EIC. And for my very first Sunday that I was there, and especially it helped with Scott Sontag on the piano, but my first Sunday that I was there, I just was blown away. These people are here to worship.
They're serious. Yeah.
And they can't, some of them travel a couple of hours.
Oh yeah.
To get to church on Sunday morning. And so that was really the exciting thing for me. And I think that's what continues to resonate with people as they move on. They may go back to a place where people come to do church on Sunday as part of the social context.
Right.
And they remember the time where they were at a place where everybody was there to worship. So that's really what strikes me about that whole sense of the international community and especially my time at EIC.
Yeah.
Think about what Bill Clark Thomas said to me when I first arrived there as a youth minister. And he talked about that in the midst of all this diversity, that the challenge in an international church is to keep the main thing, to hold some things tightly and let a lot of other things go.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved about being there at EIC was to imagine that it's a gathering of people who in their own home countries, left to their own devices, might never have gone to church together.
Yes,
where you have
almost assuredly not.
High church background and Pentecostal backgrounds and no church background and Catholic background and sort of all that. And somehow having fewer choices, like Norman suggested, meant that people had to let go of some of the things that they thought were important and really focus in on what brought everybody together. And that sense of, we can let some things go to focus on what's most important became so important to keeping the unity together. It's not always simple in an international church. Sometimes there are differences of culture, communication, or all those sorts of things, but yet people were willing to let a lot of things go to hold on to the core of the gospel
Yeah.
And I loved that sense of let's focus on what's really important in the midst of all the diversity. And I think for me, it's always made coming back to America and American churches somewhat difficult, because it feels like in America we sort of can define ourselves by our differences rather than by what holds us together. And I used to say it was always hard coming back to America because it felt like when you've tasted all of the different flavors that God has created, it made it hard to come back to eating vanilla every Sunday in America. And I just loved that diversity.
Your palate has grown. Yeah.
Yeah, your palate has grown and your interest has grown, and just learning from Christians and from all sorts of different places, whether it's, learning about what it really means to be in a country where Christians are persecuted, where their life is on the line, or in places where God has revealed God's self to people in ways that just are outside of my own experience, and hearing those stories and thinking, wow, this is really stretching me,
For sure. I often think of, when I did missionary training in the U.S., we did lots of studies on the idea of contextualization. And it's a very important thing to study. It's something to be, cognizant about. But sometimes when we study that, we fail to see we sometimes need other cultures to contextualize it to us. Because every culture doesn't see their blind spot. And that's one of the beautiful things of an international church is that, I'm sitting here reading the Bible with someone from Africa and someone from China, and they're showing me things that I hadn't thought of before, and that's a really beautiful, beautiful thing. I want to turn to this question of transience now. That is, I have a real love-hate relationship with the transients, to be honest, because there's the positive of there's always new people, but then there's the negative of, hey, I trained that leader and they went somewhere else. So how did you guys feel about that transient aspect of international church?
I was at home. It's an interesting phenomenon, and maybe it's similar with Brian and Denise's vocation, but when you're in the military, you only go someplace for 2 or 3 years, and then you pick up and you go someplace else. And Molly used to make it a point when we would go to a new assignment to ask people how long they had been there. Because if they'd been there already for 2 or 3 years, she would think, I can't invest in this relationship. I need to find somebody else.
Yeah.
And so she would invest in relationships, based on that cycling. And so we've lived with cycling through. I'd say that there are 2 words that really made the difference for me. And Brian, you sort of came into the time, but I inherited the time. Social media, and the ability to not just try to keep up with email addresses or mailbox, but to be able to actually face to face pick up a phone or pick up your computer and talk to somebody who's on the other side of the world. That's an incredible thing for places like EIC now. And so as the pastor there, I was able to hold on to that and be able to keep a lot of those relationships that were transient relationships. And of course, that's what helped us during the facelift was the social media aspect of being able to network and communicate. And Brian, you had kept a network in the States of a lot of our contacts, and that was incredible making this happen. So I think the transience was, when I went, it was just something I expected. So the idea of pastoring a parade, and you're right. It's always poignant, bittersweet. It's been wonderful to know you. We hate to see you go. Can't wait to see who's going to take your place.
For sure. I know I used to feel like I would celebrate the rentrée in September and then feel the sadness of June coming with our goodbye Sundays and celebrating people. But the goodbye Sundays also became an opportunity for people to share just a testimony about what the church had meant to them and the stories that people would share. Sometimes people would share things that were meaningful to them that I didn't even know. It became just this wonderful opportunity to bless the congregation about what this time has meant to them. And I know one of the things I would often share is that God really challenges us to bloom where we're planted, no matter how long we're there. And the example I would often use was my wife, because she came to Paris in '94 to do an internship for her MBA. And she decided that even though she had lived in Paris in college, that now in this master's program, she really wanted to invest, even though she was only going to be there for the fall. And so she came to the church. We met. She asked Ruth Thomas how she might be able to make an impact. And she began to volunteer with me, with our youth group. And it was really through Denise's decision to make an impact, to want to invest in the local church, even though she was only going to be there for a few months, that ended up creating our relationship, and then me asking her to marry me, all through that decision to really invest. And so I used to
God had a plan to work through the local
God used the local church and transients to bring my wife into my life. But I think that decision because some people, of course, they move abroad and they're like, I would hear people say, well, we've decided we're taking a break from church for several years and we're just going to travel. And you think, gosh, of course, the places that you'll visit are very attractive, but you can never replace those relationships that God's giving you the chance to pour into and be stretched by. I recognize it now that there are plenty of places I love to go back to in France, but nothing more than going back to the church and seeing the people who've impacted my life, like Henri and Anne Fraisse and so many other people. And those are relationships that had I not invested in them, I would have missed out on how much God has taught me through those people.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's very popular nowadays to think in terms of investing in experiences. I mean, it's kind of the millennial mantra, right? You invest in experience, and I'm living in France, so I'm going to travel every weekend. But I think you're right. I really feel like the ones who get the most out of their time are the people who invest in relationships and people and in the church. And we see that all the time. Visitors who come back to our church and talk, I was here from this point to this point, and at some point we have a common person that we know, no matter how old, what they are in terms of when they were here. But they come back to Paris, and what do they want to do? They don't want to see the Eiffel Tower. They want to come to EIC, and they want to see where the church is right now. And that's an exciting thing. And part of what we're talking about here is we're always going to be a part of that. That place, God has brought us through this place, and it impacts us. So along those lines, you guys dealt with the transients when you were pastors, but now you are amongst those who have transitioned. So you are alumni, and so how does that feel? What's that like, being an alumni of EIC?
Well, personally, it's just, I feel like I've been missing church now for about 5 years, and there was nothing in my experience as a pastor. And Brian, I probably would say that that's a common theme for all pastors. There was nothing like showing up at church on Sunday morning. Just the incredible flow of love, and not just from others to me and my attempt to pass that back to others, but the cross flow. And so I feel like in the last 5 years that I've been away, that I've kind of been missing something that's, I don't know, I've never experienced in any place but an international church. And I'm not sure why that's the case. A friend of mine, and Kirby, I know, Brian, I know you warned us not to go into controversial things, but I feel this is sort of important to point out, is the churches in the United States, and I guess all over the world, but certainly here in the United States, many of them are so established. A person sort of put it in context for me years ago when I came to a church as new pastor here in Louisiana. She said, I love this church, but I'll never be a part of the church. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, because when the church meets on Sunday morning, they hug. But when I show up, they shake my hand.
Wow.
And so there was actually a physical distancing that said that you're not part of that in group. And that distancing was absolutely blown away at EIC. When you showed up, you were part.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything I miss as an alumnus, it's that experience. Among many things, but paramount.
You're still one of us, Norman.
And I felt that, and I know Brian feels that every time he comes back. I've only been back once in 5 years, but man, just the welcome last year when I was able to come back was beautiful, and we had a great time and great fellowship there. So I know you use the word alumnus, and we do use that word alumnus, but I think the interesting thing is because you never really officially bring your letter to Paris, you can't remove your letter from Paris. So you get to stay.
You never graduated or anything. Like, we never gave you a diploma. So
no, there's none of that. And so I still communicate with people all over the world who are my EIC brothers and sisters, and that doesn't change.
Yeah, I feel that same connection too. It's interesting because I feel like in some ways, once you've been a part of an international church, you don't go home or to your next assignment the same. You're forever changed. There's something about what you expect of church, what you expect of yourself, what you expect of other people that just changes. And one of the things I loved about being in an international church, like you said, was how quickly people are embraced and how quickly people are allowed to use their gifting. I remember people who came and you just were able to see the spiritual maturity and understand their background and where they were from. And within just a few weeks or months, they were helping teach or they were helping lead. We didn't have the luxury of saying, well, let's watch this person for a couple of years and then we'll think about asking them to do something. It's more like, God has sent you, you're here for a purpose, let's plug you in and let's get rolling. And so many churches, I think, could benefit from that rather than the sort of, well, we've got unending time, so we're going to back burner you and kind of watch. We had to step out and trust, understand people's gifting, get to know people quickly. And I loved that. I loved that part of people just being able to plug in and really be used by God. And now on the alumni side, I just think about so many friends that we have that we're still in contact with. I'm exchanging messages with people on social media all the time who we've known from EIC. And we have a few EIC friends here in the Washington suburbs that we get together with still now. We do a raclette evening together with the Huseman's, and we're so happy when others come into town and we get a chance to connect and we watch their children grow up on social media. And you're right, it does help us stay connected. And for me to be able to be back in October helping out with the coffee house and just seeing so many people, getting a chance to be there and reconnect and feel like former members can still make a contribution, whether it's like what you were saying with the beautification for the outside or this roof project, and people are happy to do it. They're happy to still contribute and still be a part because that experience at EIC just meant so much to them.
Yeah. No, there is no doubt that we are still, God is still blessing us through the alumni. Is there a better word than alumni? I mean, I've been I've thought about it. Maybe you guys have come up with something, but I don't know what else to call you guys.
I like alumni better than old. The old pastor is not a way.
It has that college feel.
and former doesn't work either because you're still your heart's still part. You're still part. Yeah. So I think maybe I get letters from my colleges and universities asking me to contribute, and they call me an alumnus. So I guess that works too.
I can imagine it does feel that way because I like we're talking about the church and how I expect to feel one day when I leave. I feel that way about my college. I feel that way about my university. Like there's a certain attachment there that I'm still part of that family, even though I've left. Yeah. But I've never experienced that before with the church. And I think that's what makes this unique, is that it's I mean, I still have fondness with my churches from who sent me and all these kind of things. Don't get me wrong, but there's a different feel to this.
Yeah.
And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't hit the power behind that, and that's Christ.
Absolutely.
And if we don't realize that that's the glue, that He is who makes that work the way it does.
Absolutely.
That's, I think, why we're desperate for a stronger word than alumnus, because it's not just old buddies getting together. It's people who share a common Savior, and the only Savior. And I think that that's one of the things that people who come to EIC are desperate for. That they receive a message that begins in the Scripture and makes a beeline for the cross. I think something like that is what Spurgeon said. But that we were able to be faithful to that central message, and to know that really is what it is we're experiencing when we walk in the door.
It is people who would never be together under normal circumstance,
right.
And a whole community is created through the gospel, which, by the way, is what the Scripture says it can do. It breaks down these walls, and I think Norman, something you said earlier about the seriousness people come to worship with at a church like this.
Yeah,
and I think you even used the word desperation. I think that's very true, because I think when people move here, they're in sort of a high-stress life situation. They're not at home. They may not even speak French, and they're high anxiety going to the grocery store. And all of a sudden they come to church, and you're right. Like you experience that they're willing to hug you from the first day. There's a social nearness there. And I think there's something about the way God uses the church in that way that keeps our affections even when we have left. It changes us. Brian, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think the only word that I was thinking as we were talking about, is there a stronger word? The only thing I could come up with is extended family.
Yeah.
It feels like you've got, your family, and then you talk about getting an extended family, like a family reunion together.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I go back and people come back in, it feels like a family reunion, but in a spiritual family sense. It's the sort of spiritual extended family. And I think about powerful experiences from my time there, and what that family looks like. One of them that I remember so well was one of our members, Edwin, came to me and said his wife was critically ill in the Philippines, and no matter how many jobs he was working, he was not able to send all the money that he would need. And basically the hospital was saying, you have to send us this amount of money or she's probably going to die. And I remember taking that to the church council and then to the church at large and just saying, this is a real need. And just watching the church just pour out financial and as well as prayer and support blessings, and just being so moved. Even as I tell the story now, I feel the tears kind of welling up. And just I remember him thanking the congregation, and just what a powerful example it was of us really being able to save his wife's life by our giving and our sacrifice. And I just remember thinking, this is what a church family is supposed to be. This is what family is supposed to be, that we're helping save someone's life who's living halfway around the world that we don't even know, but we know her husband, his commitment to us here, and the need. And just watching the congregation pour out their love and care on him, I thought, this to me is what church should look and feel like. And that was what I got to experience at EIC.
Yeah. Wow. It is true that this God allows us, it's like you said with Edwin, like we've not met this lady, but she's our family because he's our family.
Right.
And, you know what I'm saying? And so I do think that family metaphor is a powerful one. I mean, we see one of the most overwhelming sense of that I have felt was this past year at the coffee house. So you were there for it. we and Norman, you remember very well the impending roof problem that we knew was coming.
I still have pictures.
Yeah, and nightmares. But it was something we talked about, that we knew this was going to be a big project, and we kept trying to put it off, and finally it was just the point where we couldn't put it off anymore. We tried to reach out to the alumni, and what do you know? The alumni still see us as family. They still love this church, and they showed it. And even the night of the coffee house, Brian, you had come back. Scott had gotten really involved. We also have the family of the Friends Church EBE, as well as the family of the gospel choir that also are part of this legacy, I think. And everybody teamed up. There were former members, people who were here in 2013 when I was here, who had left and now came, they were coming back. And so it was just a overflow of emotion for me, seeing the former people mixing with the flock who is here now. People who did not know each other yet were family. And seeing those family members meet and bless each other, and seeing a roof get redone, something that we could not have, the current, makeup of the EIC would have really struggled to see that finished, yet the current makeup of the EIC has a bigger family. And that is something that is super special. It was really touching to see, for me to see how God has still has plans for alumni.
Right.
And I can see that even, one day when I leave, I don't have any plans to leave, but one day when I leave, I'm going to still be part of this. And that's something that
certainly will.
That really matters to me. Norman, did you have any thoughts on that, or?
No, in fact, I was kind of going off in a different direction, because I was thinking, as you were talking roof and we were talking facelift,
right,
and an incredible number of other things. I think we would be remiss in letting this time go without giving a shout out to Rue, to the city itself, because in my 4 years there, and I'm going to give a little lament, and then I'll finish that. If I had to do all over again, Brian, I would have found somebody who could have force-fed me French until, because when I first came to the church, one of the things that they said was, "No, you really don't need to speak French to do your job here," and they were right, as we talked about that. But I think to be a pastor in that community, you do. They were very loving and very embracing and very tolerant of my not learning French for 4 years that I was there. And I still consider, Molly and I both consider that our biggest shortcoming as pastor is not doing that, because we could have been so much more a part of a community who really did love us, who took care of us, who, to the degree they could, under the 1905 laws of France, could say, we're going to do everything we can to sustain you and to make things happen there. And so I think, because I know that there are other churches in Paris who are struggling with their local governments.
Absolutely. I've been a big beneficiary from the kindness of the town of Rueil-Malmaison. And one of the reasons, again, is this is stepping on the shoulders of giants, but I was benefiting from relationships that were made by others before me. And I've done mission work in Paris before I came to EIC, and I know very well there are some towns that really don't like evangelicals, and really make life hard on them. And so when I came to Roué, when I came to EIC, not only did I not find problems, I found help, and I found grace, I found cooperation. They wanted to hear from us, we wanted to hear from them, and not everything is easy administratively in France, but it is it has been a grace, and I know, Brian, you did a lot during your time to kind of set up the association and those kind of things as well.
Brian laid miles of pipe.
Yeah.
It was great to be able to use just background in French and love for France, and to see just an openness and a connection with the city hall, and to be a part of a ministers group that they began during my time there. It was so wonderful to gather with clergy across the city, from the Catholic priests to imams to from people from the temples to. It was so wonderful to be able to sit down with City Hall representatives and just talk about what our faith communities were doing and what we could do together and how we could educate each other. And I just felt like it was such a wonderful and rich environment to be a part of that I haven't really seen in any other place, even in the United States or other places that I've served. I've not been able to be a part of that kind of cross-religious sharing, especially sponsored by the City Hall, which I think was just so wise and really has helped EIC in so many ways.
For sure. Well, we're getting short on time, but I'm going to do one more quick question / plug, because I do hope we're talking about alumni or family or whatever word we're going to use. And we certainly at EIC, especially me as a pastor, I'm always trying to think of how can I keep the alumni involved and feel like they're still welcome. And so, I'll throw this question out to you guys, and then I'll say some of the things we've done. But I would love to hear what are ways that alumni you think can stay involved with EIC in a way that's appropriate. Obviously, we want everyone who is sent away from EIC to plug into a church wherever they go, and so that's important. But in terms of keeping these connections, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, personally, I'm retired. And so I think like a retired person. I'm sort of a passively involved with a lot of things. And I have found that I'm passively involved with EIC a great deal more than actively involved. But I say that just to say, because you don't hear from the alumni, I would guess that doesn't mean because they're not watching and they're not hearing.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate both the weekly letter, just finding out what's going on tomorrow at church, and the alumni letter, and those are great plugs to say, we're still here, we're still alive, and you're part of that heritage. And I think that the only thing, because I'm getting older and the brain is sort of gelling a little bit more, it's nice to have links that I can click on to see what's going on. So when I look at EIC to say what are alumni interests or what are what's going on at the church, or maybe I'm thinking of coming to Paris next month and I'd be walking into when I go. Is it something that I would want to reschedule so I can be there for a particular event? I know that we did that last year to sort of coordinate helping you out and our trip.
I was so sad I missed your trip, but it did work out well because we needed a preacher that week.
And we made that adjustment so that could happen, and that was great. We loved it. But I think I would just say, like I said again, reiterate from a retired person's point of view. And I don't know how many of our alumni are retired, but I would imagine a good number are. We just like picking up the letter and seeing it. I say picking up, but getting it in our inbox, and just seeing what's going on and how the roof fund is going, and how are you guys dealing with coronavirus and things like that. We still feel a part. No Bisous on Sunday. But I miss that, but I still feel like I'm a part of it just because you've left us a connecting point. Thanks, Parker.
Good.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing such a great job of leveraging social media and connections and electronic forms. I know I've seen some recent videos on Instagram and others of kind of Throwback Thursday or recap videos or previous missions trips, and I've really loved seeing those and sharing them with other people, and having Denise and I and Annalise looking at them and thinking about our time there. And I think projects like the roof or other opportunities for alumni to weigh in and feel like they can still make a contribution. And I agree with Norman, just opportunities to read and hear testimonies of what the church is still doing and how it's still impacting people, I think is really powerful. I'm sure as people think about moving away this summer, could even be that you interview and film some spots like you've done just to highlight an EIC member, I think is great, but maybe opportunities as people are thinking of transitioning away to talk about, in a minute, what their time at EIC has meant to them. I think those kind of testimonies are always powerful. But I think you guys do such a good job of trying to keep us continually connected.
Well, that's one of the graces maybe that's come through this quarantine is that, but it has made us do all these projects that were just ideas before concerning social media. We've got an Instagram now. Our Facebook is, we have a daily post and it's ordered and it's structured and it's, we have a weekly video. You mentioned the Throwback Thursday videos. It's just one of those examples of you have a talented person who comes through your church and they know how to do things like that. And hey, here's a great way to serve. And I agree. Those videos have been big blessings to me to look back and say. There was one the other day. I was on a mission trip and I had this big beard and it was funny because I looked really different, and it's fun to see those things. So I'll mention if you are alumni and wanting to know, the EIC Paris page on Facebook. If you're on Facebook and use it, if you like that or follow that page, we have a daily post, and many of them are these kind of videos. This video right here is going to be the Friday post, and so if you might be watching it because of that. But that is a good way to keep up. We did start an Instagram as well, and we also now have a YouTube channel, which again, it was one of those things that we started in response to the coronavirus situation. But we're putting the sermons both from the Rue Malmaison as well as the Church Plant at Turn. And then these videos we've started doing weekly, as well as the Throwback Thursday videos that you mentioned. All of those are on the YouTube channel. So if you don't like Facebook, there's many people like you who don't like Facebook. Look on YouTube; it's all there as well. And then Norman mentioned the 2 newsletters, and those you can sign up for online. There's a weekly one that is the target audience is people who are here because it's informing of news. But if you like reading that, Norman, then great. Knowing what's going on, and then there is a quarterly. We try to send it out every 3 months. A quarterly alumni newsletter, which is a little bit like a letter you might receive from a missionary, just giving updates on the ministry as well as ways you can be praying for us. And so we would love to have you involved. And please, alumni, if you're in Paris, come see us. I want to meet you. I want to know, it's funny. We had this family who came a couple of years ago, and they had a daughter who was born, I think, maybe during your time, Brian, or Scott Stearman's time, and they came back and she ended up going to youth camp with us, and now she's a regular, she feels like she is part of the youth group. And it's just funny to see, these kind of things happen. And that, that's just came because they visited the church, and came back and introduced themselves. And so do come and see us. Guys, thank you so much. Any closing thoughts before we stop?
Well, mine will be what I would say every time. I miss you guys. I desperately miss Sunday mornings worship services there, and certainly miss the fellowship. And thank you, Parker, for your strength especially through this difficult time.
Yes.
But your integrity in your leadership there at EIC. Thanks for everything you do.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity just to be a part of this and an ongoing part of the church. I love this Gertrude Stein quote where she said that America is my home country, but Paris is my hometown. And I feel that way. And I feel like in so many ways, EIC will always be my home church. And so it's just great to feel still connected and still be a part of that extended family and that community. So thanks, Parker, for letting me continue to have a role, a place, an influence, and to be able to encourage you and others who are connecting there. The church means the world to Denise, Annalise, and to me. And just appreciate you so much letting me be a part of this conversation today. And it's great to see you and to see Norman and for us to be able to share together.
Well, and thanks for your kind words. And one of the phrases I say all the time here is, I need the Jesus in you just like you need the Jesus in me. And so we're thankful that our church can continue to share the Jesus in us, but we also are very thankful for the way you have shared with us the Jesus in you. I know that many people in our church are very encouraged just by seeing your face. This is a hard time. There is struggles going on right now. There's sickness. There's economic struggles, and seeing faces like you guys is a comfort to us. You are guys who have labored in these fields and have proved faithful, and so we're so thankful that you have been here with us today. All right,
Thanks,
well,
Mark.
that will close us out for today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll try to be back next week. With our plan next week, actually, is to have a podcast where we're inviting KJ will be back, as well as Cyril Petit and Edward Nelson, who are the two French churches that our church partners with. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, what that's like to partner with other churches. So that'll be next week. Otherwise, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Norman, so much for joining us. God bless.